on Great Earth. We are currently looking at an article of The Guardian. Great Barrier Reef suffering most severe coral bleaching on record as footage shows damage 18 meters down. There is a video associated with it.
So I've been working on the Great Barrier Reef since 1992, so it's absolutely heartbreaking every time there's a bleaching event. But this one, I'm really struggling with this one, to be honest. The diversity of species involved has been quite hard to deal with, so that when we go out and look at those bleached areas, there are so many different species that are bleached, many of which are usually fairly resistant to bleaching. So as little as 1 degree above the average summer maximum temperature can cause a bleaching event if it lasts long enough. Generally, if we get to 6 to 8 degree heating weeks, we would start to get a fair amount of mortality. This summer, we've had 10 to 12 degree heating weeks across much of the Great Barrier Reef. So this is a pretty alarming event. So this bleaching event again brings us to the question of what we're doing to stop the reef from being lost. And I can't help but wonder what it's going to take for the right decisions to be made. We really are running out of time. We need to reduce our emissions immediately. We cannot expect to save the Great Barrier Reef and to be opening new fossil fuel developments, whether they be coal or gas. So it's time to act, and there are no more excuses.
Concern that the Great Barrier Reef may be suffering the most severe mass coral bleaching event on record has escalated after a conservation group released footage showing damage up to 18 meters or around 60 feet below the surface. Dr. Selena Ward, a marine biologist and former academic director of the University of Queensland Heron Island Research Station, said it was the worst bleaching she had seen in 30 years working on the reef, and that some coral was starting to die. The Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority last week said aerial surveys of more than 1,000 individual reefs revealed more than half were rated as having high or very high levels of bleaching. Let's take a look at the bleaching. This is all this red you see here. All this red is level 2 bleaching. Look at the South Pacific, or sorry, the South Atlantic. Over to the South Pacific. There is no level 3, it's just level 2, level 1, bleaching watch, no stress. Where you see red is the highest rated bleaching possible. Only about a quarter were relatively unaffected. It confirmed the 2,300 kilometer reef system would experience its 5th mass bleaching event in 8 years. The authorities said sea surface temperatures had been between 0.5 Celsius and 1.5 Celsius hotter than expected for this time of year. The Australian Marine Conservation Society on Thursday released video and photos that said it showed bleaching on the southern part of the reef extended to greater depths than had been previously reported this year. Ward said the impact of bleaching had been extensive across 16 sites that she visited in the reef's southern section, affecting coral species that have usually been resistant to bleaching. Some coral had started to die, a process that usually takes weeks or months after bleaching occurs. I feel devastated, she said. I've been working on the reef since 1992, but this event I'm really struggling with. Ward said sea temperatures at 2 of the sites she visited were the same on the surface and 20 meters below the surface. This was very unusual and reinforced the need for rapid action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, she said. What are we doing to stop the reef from being lost? Ward said. We cannot expect to save the Great Barrier Reef and be opening new fossil fuel developments. It's time to act and there are no more excuses. Coral bleaching occurs when the coral becomes heat stressed and ejects the tiny marine algae that live in the tissue and give most of its color and energy. Zoophanthaly gone. Corals
Zooxanthella.
Zooxanthella. With the Zooxanthella gone, the coral starves and its bone white calcium skeleton becomes visible. Like if our skin came off. If the elevated temperature doesn't last long, the coral can recover. Otherwise, it starts to die. In the most severe cases, the bleaching is skipped and the coral dies almost immediately, usually turning a dirty brown. Terry Hughes, an emeritus professor at James Cook University and longtime reef bleaching researcher, said the aerial survey showed the most widespread and most severe mass bleaching and mortality event ever recorded on the Great Barrier Reef. He said the scale of damage was comparable to 2016, the worst previous year experienced, but there were now fewer individual reefs untouched by bleaching between southern Queensland and the Torres Strait. He said the area south of Townsville had been particularly badly hit this year. We're already seeing extensive loss of corals at the time of peak bleaching, he said. It's heartbreaking to see damage as severe as this as soon as this. You said every part of the reef system had now bleached at least once since 1998. Some reefs had bleached 3 or 4 times. He said that cumulative damage made it harder for reefs to recover and more likely they would succumb. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in 2018 found that most tropical coral reefs would be lost if global heating was limited to an average of 1.5 C. Above pre-industrial levels, 99% were likely to be lost if heating reached 2 Celsius. They found they would be at high risk at 1.2 Celsius, a level that may have already been reached. Dr. Lisa Schindler, an ecologist and the reef campaign manager with the Australian Marine Conservation Society, called on the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority to release maps showing the extent and severity of the bleaching so the public had a true picture of the scale of the impact. Schindler also urged the authority, which she described as the reef's custodian, to play a greater role in advocating for a stronger action on emissions. She said in the past the authority had called for strong and fast national action to deal with the climate crisis, but a more recent climate statement it issued focused on global action and did not say anything about Australia needing to increase what it is doing. If the Albanese government is serious about its commitment to UNESCO to protect the reef, then it must commit to net zero emissions by 2035 and stop approving new fossil fuel projects, she said. Scientists have said that the government's emissions reductions targets a 43% cut compared with 2005 levels and net zero by 2050 are consistent with global action that could lead to 2 degrees Celsius of global heating. Interviewed on ABC's Radio National on Wednesday, the Environment Minister Tanya Pleversic said the government was very concerned about the bleaching and that we, at the moment, sadly, not just on the Great Barrier Reef, but right around the world. She said the government was doing whatever we can to get to net zero emissions. We need to protect the reef because it's unique in the world, and also 64,000 people rely on it for their work, she said. A reef authority spokesperson said it confirmed in early March that widespread coral bleaching was unfolding. They said in-water coral surveys were continuing, and a report including data and maps, will be published in the coming weeks. Again, everything you see here in red is severe coral bleaching, the highest level that possible. The northern hemisphere was last season. Now it's the southern hemisphere, and the oceans can't take it. And as water heats, it expands, causing sea level rise. Thank you for joining me. If you haven't already, please like the stream, subscribe to the channel. Helps me, keeps me motivated. Putting out content like this, especially some that is just so severe and massive, and we're doing nothing. All right. Thank you. Take care.